Well, as promised, a quick video report to cover some odds and ends that I did not cover in the report this weekend, and also wanted to go over some other ideas that are out there to take a look at. First thing I wanted to look at was Intuitive Surgical. The stock has continued to make new highs, and it's acted well. You'll notice, though, that the time to be buying this thing is when it's pulling back into either the 20-day or the 50-day. In this case, you can see more recently it pulled into the 50-day line here. So you had 1, 2, 3 pullbacks, and the third one finally worked, and the stock continued to the upside and broke out. And you did have several pocket pivots down here. These are all highlighted in blue. By the way, this is HGS Investor software for those of you who aren't familiar with it. And this particular chart view will highlight pocket pivots. So let's actually go to a simpler view here that gets rid of some of the noise we've got in here. Yeah, I prefer the fat bars here. Let's do that. So you can see here, you get a better picture of what's going on. And the thing is, I don't know if this is really high time value. If you look at the moves here, you're pulling, say, off of the 50-day line here, and this is around 476, 478, say, and you run up to 520. I mean, that's like a $47 stock going to 52 bucks. So that's not a bad move, but it's not like you're getting a huge move out of this thing. Basically, what it's doing is it bases and then it breaks out, it runs up a little bit, basing again and running up. You're not getting any major upside, and they're going to be reporting earnings on Thursday. On the 19th, so there's something to keep an eye on. I've had it on my buy watch list for a while, and it's been in the reports for a while, and it's continued to act well, but it's not what I would call a big performer. So, I mean, the types of things that I like in terms of time value are where you can pick off something, you know, like a drop box on the pocket pivot in here, and you get this nice 41% move in a few days. And now it's all the way back. I do talk about this in the report, but it's all the way back to the starting point. Maybe it's going to do it again, but we'll see. Cinderella doesn't always come to the ball twice, so we'll see what happens this time around. Also, on Tuesday, you're going to have CSX Corp. It's a railroader. It's been on my list for a long time, but you can see from the pattern, it really hasn't gone very far. I mean, the biggest move, you had the viable gap up, and then it took almost close to 3 weeks. It might have actually been about exactly 3 weeks before it got going again, and it's been a very shallow trend, worth about 10% from the gap up move here to here, and now you pull back into the 50-day line. Now you're kind of trundling about, pulling back into the 50-day line again ahead of earnings, but those are going to come out on the 17th, which would be Tuesday after the close. So, you know, the rails are slow movers, but they're trending higher. You got Norfolk Southern got tagged on Wednesday here. You can see the heavy volume, well, not heavy, but above average. You have the heavier volume on the upside, and you have a number of pocket pivot volume signatures, but they're not pocket pivots because they're extended from the moving averages. So technically not pocket pivots, but they're acting okay. And it's trying to move higher, and it'll be coming out with earnings on the 25th of July, which is, I believe, week after this week. Another area of strength that we've been seeing in this market is, of course, I haven't talked about these in the reports recently, but they're continuing to act fine. And there's not much to say about them other than that you buy them when they pull back. You have Palo Alto Networks, which is a pretty volatile affair up here because you get a break here, rally back to new highs, you break again, and now you're rallying back to new highs. Obviously, you don't want to be chasing this on the upside. You want to be trying to buy it on pullbacks. Notice also there's something similar about this along the 50-day, similar to Intuitive Surgical, where you had 1, 2, 3 tests of the 50-day line before it held up and continued higher. So, you know, if you're trying to buy it off the 50-day line, it could be shaking you out. Like, let's say you try to buy on this day, you could have gotten shaken out on this day. And if you try to buy it on this day, you might have gotten shaken out on this day as it's starting to pop below the 50-day, depending on what the general market's doing. So, you know, not so easy to hang with these, and the volatility creates a very choppy trend, even though it's an uptrend. But it's a shallow uptrend, so there's no real time value in terms of these names. I tend to like Cyber is probably one of the better names, and you can see this thing got tagged and it's turned around and regained the 20-day line up here, and now we're back at new highs, and it won't be coming out with earnings until second week of August, early second week of August. So this one continues to act well, and the time to be buying it is probably when it looks like you shouldn't be buying it, which is when you're breaking down here. But you're going to notice if you peg this low here, you undercut that low, and then you do come back above it in here. So there was potential to come back into the stock on an undercut and rally. Fortinet's another one. They'll be coming out with earnings on August 1st, so that's not too long from now, a couple of weeks. And you can see it's moved to new highs. Looks a lot like Cyber. Same situation, though, where you have pullback underneath a prior low. You could peg this low, for example, and you try to rally back above it once and then twice. And then finally, on this attempt here, it held the 20-day line and continued higher. And you might ask the question, how do you handle something like this in terms of the entry? Well, the only way to handle it is you buy it on the move up through the prior low, and then if it doesn't hold, then that's your stop, and you're just out. You might have to come back into it a couple of times if it turns around and goes back up through that low again, and you may do it once or twice more, and then finally you catch one and it works, and that's what happened here on the third one. Now, here's something else to note. If you're finding that a move through one low isn't working, then look for another low in the pattern, and that would be, in this case, this low here. You get an undercut of that here, and we can check that just to make sure. The low here is 60.83 and 60.86 on these 2 days here, and the low here is 61.53, so that didn't do it. And then here, your low is 61.08, so you actually don't get it there, but you could see if that happened, and that would be one way to pick an alternate entry. Of course, it didn't happen in this case, but I'm just using this as an example. But again, it shows how difficult this market is, even when you're trying to play undercut and rally moves. And it's a very tricky market. You get a lot of news-oriented movement that creates a lot of funkiness, and then these sort of delayed undercut and rallies that you saw among a whole bunch of different stocks over the past, say, week or over a week ago, say, well, 1 to 2 weeks ago. Excuse me, that makes it very difficult. So other names to be watching here that are moving higher. Salesforce continues to make new highs, and you can see a similar situation here. It did not undercut these lows. In fact, it didn't undercut any lows. You could call this a low if you wanted to, but it's not really a low up here. That would be up in this region here, but it's really just kind of popping out. Now you get a bunch of pocket pivot volume signatures here. They're 5-day pocket pivots, and it's just continuing higher. And so it's difficult to come up with a very concrete entry point, but it is going higher. And you saw also CRM's smaller cousins, now ServiceNow, but that's obviously an undercut and rally because you undercut this low here, and you also undercut this low. This low you probably could have used as a reference for an undercut and rally, and it's continued straight up from there. A lot of these stocks were moving earlier this past week after we had the news that Broadcom was buying Computer Associates, CA. A lot of people are wondering why the heck they would buy them, but they did, and so that created a rally in a lot of software names, and a broad range of them actually, because not only now, but I can go through and show you Workday, which had already been rallying, but notice here where you get the breakdown to the 200-day line, and that looks pretty ugly. But then you rally back above that low, which could have been used as an undercut and rally reference low, or this low and this low here when you came back above that, because it did hold and it has continued higher. And now you're back up to the highs of the base, and what are you going to do between now and earnings? Are you just going to chop sideways? I mean, in terms of a time value, or in terms of the time value of the trade, this was a very nice move to play over the last 2 weeks, and it all came from an undercut and rally type move. I'm watching the futures open up right now. It's just after 3 p.m. my time. We got the Nasdaq up 19, the S&P's up 550. No surprise there. There's really nothing to cause the market to sell off right now, in my view, in terms of news flow. There was some news that Israel had taken out an Iranian supply route, I guess, along the Syria-Iraq border, and that's not really doing anything to the future. So some other names that look interesting here. I'm going to go through this list. This box, you had an undercut and rally through here. Probably should pull up my crosshairs. That probably make things a lot easier to check. Yeah, you can see you undercut this low here, and you rallied back above it. They come out with earnings at the end of August, and that set up an undercut and rally move. Now you're kind of trundling along the 20-day, and I don't know if this becomes viable in here, looking for a re-breakout. You had a couple of attempts at breaking out here. These both failed, and this thing became a breakout failure, but where it becomes viable is when it undercuts the lows of the base. Very typical for this market. Here's Data is another one of these software names that got some momentum this week because of the news with Broadcom buying up Computer Associates, but it had already been moving higher in similar fashion. I think let's actually take a look here, see which lows it undercut. It looks to me like you undercut the lows here, and then you also undercut this low, and you rallied back above it. It held actually on this day here, so it's moved higher. So again, if you're able to be flexible and to come out and go back in a couple of times with these undercut and rally moves, you actually do get some very high time value trades. And these are the types of things I like to play. I haven't talked about these in the reports, but I have talked, or in the written reports, but I have talked about them in the video reports, and they remain valid ideas, so they should be on your watch list. Nutanix is another undercut and rally move. Here you undercut this low here, down here. Now this is one of these delayed or slow motion types of undercut and rally setups, because it takes one, two, well, let's see if I can even count this right. 1, 2, 3 of them. I think the third one actually worked, and it held tight in here, right in here, and has trundled higher. You had a 5-day pocket pivot here on this day, but you didn't really clear the 50-day line. Now you're hanging along the 50-day line. You have earnings due at the end of August, and maybe this thing is going to continue to go higher from here in a re-breakout attempt. Again, it wouldn't surprise me, but notice how you get a breakout and you fail miserably. And so now this is looking like a textbook late-stage failed base. But in this market, and this is one aspect that makes it so difficult on the short side, is that the old short sale setups don't work. They turn into undercut and rally setups, and they become long setups rather than short sale setups. This comes into the 50-day line, so you think, okay, obviously this is a clear cover point when it undercuts here and then turns, so you'd be waiting for a rally up into the 50-day line for this to become shortable again, but it just goes right through it, and for all you know, it's going to set up and continue going higher. So, very tricky, but I think you just have to go with the flow and also recognize that the old rules don't apply. And this even goes for short sale setup patterns. Things that were tried and true and that I discussed at length in my most recent book on short selling, which came out in 2015. But the picture has changed in this market, and this is the sort of thing that you're dealing with. So the undercut and rally setup becomes your most potent weapon, so that's really what you're trying to do here. Look at 3D Systems also. This was acting pretty well. I did talk about it in here in earlier video reports, and it has moved higher. But, where is the place to buy it? On the strength here? On the strength here? No. What you come after it when it undercuts, you got a low in here. You got lows in here or here, and you're undercutting here and then rallying back above it and breaking out to higher highs. So I don't really like the look of the volume here. It's flattening out too much. Let me take this. That's maybe a little better. But you can see here you've got a 5-day pocket pivot on the breakout. So am I going to buy here? I don't think so. But it was buyable on the undercut and rally move, and you're going to see this across the board. Going through a few more of these. Let's see. Canada Goose Holdings. I think they're coming out with earnings at the end of the month, but notice how it's holding very tight along the 10-day line. Volume drawing up in here pretty nicely. A couple others. Etsy is going to come out with earnings on August 2nd. It's hanging in there pretty tight, but probably doesn't go anywhere until earnings occur. And I hope some of you are playing in Funko. Funko is a lot of fun. It was a slow mover from the 8.5, well, just above the 8 price level when I first started talking about it. That would have been, well, now you can see this looking pretty compressed, but that would have been down in here. and it started off real slow now. More recently, it's gained some pretty good momentum, but it's going parabolic. So I keep thinking this thing is going to, or is having a climax top, and yeah, it's not. This is almost like the 90s, the late 90s, where stocks would gather momentum and then they just bounce off the 10-day line and just ping back to the upside and make new highs, and that's what it's doing. However, you do have a huge volume spike in here on Friday, and you sort of stalled here. Well, you didn't sort of stall. You stalled pretty good. You closed below mid-range, but is this thing going higher from here? I don't know. Maybe it just keeps going up to 20 or so. But so far, it's hanging in there pretty well. And every time it looks like it's climaxing and it's going to pull back and try and build a base, it just turns around and goes higher. So great stock. I mean, I talked about this in the reports way back when, and then I gave everyone a chance to get into it as it was just hanging tight, and then it slowly started to take off. And it did gather a little momentum after I tweeted about it at about 8:65, I think it was. But it didn't really gather that much momentum. It's only more recently gotten crazy on the upside. And I think most of that is due to the fact that they have a documentary out now that's on Netflix, which I believe is titled The Business of Fun. So if you haven't checked that out already, based on my mentioning it before, you might want to do that. For those of you who subscribe to Netflix. Anyways, that's pretty much what I'm seeing right now in terms of other names. The railroads are still viable. I'm mostly going with I'm looking at all of these hot to trot little IPOs to see if maybe they're going to turn back to the upside. There are several here. There's Box again. This is my quasi-actionable list for tomorrow. There's DocuSign, another hot IPO. Earnings don't come out till September, but you notice you get a pocket pivot in here, and it is back above the 20-day line holding tight. That looks to me like it's viable. Evolus or Evolus, I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's a thin trader, 565,000 shares a day. Not my cup of tea, but you can see here that you have a low right here, and you undercut the low here, and you've rallied above it, and you're holding it. Volume's drying up, and you're holding tight. So you're kind of in a viable position on the basis of this undercut and rally setup. Let's see, what else? Let's keep moving along here. Canada Goose, I already talked about. Turtle Beach, talked about in the report. I'm just looking for this thing maybe to drift in just a little bit more, but it looks like it might want to go higher. The whole video game space seems to be catching some fire, at least a little bit, say nothing major yet, but we don't want it to happen before we get in. So I think a lot of these things are setting up. So there may be something here, and that includes names like Huya and Billy, as I talked about in the report. Inspire Medical, this is kind of interesting. You have a Bible gap up here, big volume, and now you're drifting back in, and it trades 308,000, so very thin. So be mindful of that. If you're going to buy a small position, I think that might work. But pulling into the lows of the Bible gap up day, and the volume is drying up, so that may bring it into a viable position here, one to keep an eye on, I think. And let's see, IQ I talked about in the report. No, I did not actually. And you have a, I don't believe you just missed a pocket pivot by 1 day. But you know what? I really wouldn't worry about that. I think that's a strong volume move back above the 20-day line. The volume dries up the next day or declines, and it holds tight above the 20-day line, so that does put it in a viable position. And the reason it's viable primarily is because you have a low here, you undercut the low here, you sputter around it in here, and then you continue higher. So you're not too far above this low here, but I would use the 20-day line or the 10-day line as my guides, or selling guides rather. Let's see what else we got. Press on Lulu, holding very tight. That looks okay. It's right up there with Nike. That's another one I like. Here's Momo. Momo's lost its Momo. I mean, it had some pretty good Momo in here. I talked about this in the report, but what I would watch for here is either an undercut of these lows that it then rallies back above, or an undercut of these lows. So those are things to keep an eye on this week. Here's Nike holding very tight at the 10-day line. Volume dried up quite a bit on Friday, so that looks pretty interesting. Okta, I talked about in the report. Tesla, I'm sorry, that's not Tesla. That's Pivotal Software. Got ahead of myself there. I talked about this, I believe, in the report. and this looks viable on the pullback here at the 10-day line. So volume pulled back or declined on Friday. So you have, again, an undercut and rally. You undercut this low. Here you rally back above it. Now you're pulling into the 10-day and the 20-day line. That brings it to a low-risk entry position. We also have Tesla, which I think may be viable. I talked about this in the report. So I may give this a shot on the long side tomorrow. We'll see what happens. Depends on how it opens up. And then, of course, we want to keep an eye on Zscaler, which is already moving up after undercutting this low and rallying. Notice how it took 2 tries. It took 1 try that failed, and then a second try. Now, if you're alert to this, yeah, okay, you might get stopped out on this pullback here if you're playing the first one here, but you can come back to it on the second one, and that worked. It's a little slow, but it really never came below this low here, or this low here. And it's now back up near the highs of this base, and maybe if you get a pullback to the 10-day line, that would look better in terms of a lower risk entry opportunity. And finally, Zuora, I'm kind of watching this one. This is interesting. This is another one of these hot IPOs. It trades pretty good, 1.128 million shares a day. Down to the 50-day line. You got some support there on Thursday. You have a low in here. Maybe if you get an undercut and rally through those lows that holds, then maybe you've got something going on. Now, remember, all of these IPOs I'm talking about, they all had hot moves back into mid-June, and then they all topped. So what I'm counting on here is that the market rally continues. And what you'll see is you get these hot IPOs, and I've seen this in the past. You can go check like the hot solar names back in 2007, where they all had hot moves, and then they all just busted apart. And then the market had another rally, and they all turned around and, formed these short little punch bowls, punch bowls of death that eventually topped, and they went lower. But you got a nice move coming back up the other side. So that's something, I'm operating on a theory that maybe we're going to see this occur if the general market continues to move higher, and that would mean that Huya might head back up to the highs, and that would be a very nice move to play. And that includes, a number of these other names, such as Evolus is hanging in there, Ebolus is hanging in there pretty well, but these other ones, Ziora might be one of them. So DocuSign, that may be another one as well, but it's sort of just a standard cup after a nice uptrend, so it could just be rounding out a new base. But you can see some of these may be setting up, and some of the hotter ones that have broken down sharply, such as the Bilibili, you could get a punch bowl type setup where it just rockets back to the highs. And as I wrote in the report over the weekend, the reason that happens is that everybody who missed this first move to the upside, now they get another chance. And once it starts to get moving, then everybody piles in again. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to miss the second move. So everybody's got to run into it. And that will drive the move back up to new highs, or back up to the old highs rather, creating a deep little punch bowl formation. Anyways, that's all I've got for now, everybody. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday afternoon, and we'll just see what happens tomorrow. It could be an interesting day. So take care. Bye-bye.